Hello there, friends and family. Welcome back to our first session of Let's Harp About It right here in 2022 with your favorite host. I do have a guest. She practically will feel like a co-host today, but fam, I'm excited. If you can't tell, I'm super excited for this discussion. If you caught up from the last Let's Harp About It we had with Ken Baroni, right? Like, are you sensing a theme here yet? Right? And accountability when it comes to law enforcement, whether it's community policing, traffic law enforcement, across the board. We're all about it. We're about increasing education and awareness in order for us to reduce harassment and assault incidents across the board, right? Whether that's, street and transit harassment, workplace violence, domestic violence and domestic abuse, child abuse, whatever kind of the concerns, we want to make sure that you are well equipped to handle these situations and handle them accordingly. And at the core of this, what is it all rooted in? Consent and bodily autonomy, and ensuring that folks really understand how to exercise that however, whenever, wherever. And so with that, as you may know, today's topic is what? Traffic, law enforcement, and community relations. And I have an amazing guest. She's our local liaison here. Our local lead here in Harrisburg. And she's going to be sharing some really timely, really essential information that folks need to know in the community, that hopefully also could be applicable if you're not a Harrisburg resident. Perhaps these are some ideas that you could take and apply in your practice wherever you happen to be, in terms of how you, if you're in law enforcement or if you're a community member, how to advocate for better community relations with law enforcement. And so, this issue of the community relations and law enforcement, particularly here in Harrisburg, really is rooted in the passing of Bill 8, which established a Citizen Law Enforcement Advisory Committee to review the actions of the Harrisburg Police. And so as the community had been really advocating for some core requirements in Bill 8, which one of them was not necessarily have an advisory committee, but instead have a review board that had subpoena power. Obviously, that didn't happen. Okay, but instead, we ended up having the advisory committee with administrative subpoena powers, as well as one of the requirements that was removed from the original proposal was the requirement that board members participate in the police ride-along and undergo police academy training. That's a whole other conversation. And so, without further ado, fam, I know folks are interested in, hearing what my guest today has to say. So I would like to invite the one and only Miss Anna White. So come on through, family. Come on through. Oh, welcome. Thank you for your time today. Hold on. Are you muted? You're muted.
Here I am. Am I here? Okay.
Welcome. Yes, I was trying to maintain my composure and be professional, but I'm like, I was so giddy. Like, I know, yeah. I recognize the fact that it's a touchy subject. It is an uncomfortable topic, and depending on which side of the proverbial fence you stand, and maybe depending on what kind of experiences one comes into these spaces of conversation with, you have a very different outlook, a very different
absolutely
take on things. So yeah, let's just get into it. If you don't mind, please introduce yourself to the people. Let them know who you are, what you do, what you is, all that good stuff.
So my name is Anna White. Thank you so much for having me, first and foremost. And in this capacity of the conversation, I will be speaking as a previous director for community engagement and relations. I do mental health and more so social service background and contracting work at the moment. But in this capacity for this conversation, I will be utilizing my knowledge as the previous director of community relations and engagement for Harrisburg Police Department in the city of Harrisburg.
Oh, that part. Okay. So with that very direct and succinct introduction, let's get right into the nitty-gritty here today. When you think of public safety versus this idea of we need more policing to feel safer, right? So like even maybe combining both as a civilian but also as somebody who's had experiences working like with the inner workings of law enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
how does that like come together in your mind when you think of public safety? Do you automatically think more policing is needed, or how do you marry those two things?
Right. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about specifically my involvement is because it was a let's say contentious. It was a little bit. It was there were a lot of concerns because
Okay.
I had a very strong opinion on law enforcement and policing, and then I was coming into the fold kind of under that umbrella, right? So the question was always on the ability for me to be trusted, on the ability for me to be able to see both lens and not necessarily come in with a bias, or just frankly my ability to not sabotage entire projects, right? So I was tasked with creating the infrastructure for what we know as our main source of community building and engagement between the police department and the community. So one of the things that I thought was important to start off with was saying that it needed to be trauma informed. The part about public safety for me is that individuals have to feel a sense of protection from any space practicing public safety. So public safety is really about, do I feel protected in any space, relationship wise, professional wise? Is there a sense of protection? Now, how individuals feel that they best protect you, we know in any relationship differs on their experience, right? So some people's love language makes you feel loved in a different way, and your lens is just not connecting that as a space of protection, albeit their best intention to utilize their space and their way of protecting. So public safety for me focuses on, how do you hear the consensus of how people in your community wish to be protected? And are you listening to that? Are you valuing that? And are you honoring that in the work that you're doing? Is that translating in a way that your intention is matching what I am receiving? So for me, looking at it from a trauma-informed lens is me saying, first and foremost, let's acknowledge that we've all been through some stuff individually at two separate spaces, as a us and them. Like, let's keep it honest in how that trauma translates itself into us on either end not feeling valued, heard, understood. And then once we can keep it honest in that space, how do we do our best to protect both spaces of community and also viable and valuable and honorable law enforcement officials?
Oh, yes. That's why I mute myself, because I'm like, I'm out here like, yes,
That's it.
it's like
praise report.
Yes. No, because fam, that is so true, right? Like, it is so important, literally, in every space to come from a place of understanding that, folks have endured some real trauma out here, particularly when we talk about the relationships and interactions with law enforcement, whether it's personal, communal, generational, societal, all these things matter.
And what you said in the beginning about depending on what side of the fence you are, right? But what I think was so important is to understand that community building with an entity like law enforcement is about respecting the gray. So a lot of times people would ask me, uniformed officers would say, do you trust law enforcement? Like,
Oh, that's
do you believe in the policing system? Do you? And I was always like, it's not a black and white answer. I can't deliver a black and white answer because there has to be a space of honesty that is respected.
yes.
And why there is like you have to honor the
spirit of uncertainty is real.
The thing with the thing, right? But oftentimes when you say that, it's automatically interpreted as, oh, well, if we're going to bring up slavery and we're going to bring up George and we're going to bring up, then you just don't. And it's like, no. I can still honor and respect a system while still looking at the
it's not mutually
able to honor that as a civilian. It's just as important as law enforcement honoring. I can understand that even though it wasn't me, that something that I represented has accounted for the massive distrust. I can honor that by changing behavior, by understanding more, by asking how I can amend behaviors, right? But if there's no honoring of the gray, then it's this side of the fence and this side of the fence. And then that's not engaging. And then that's not that bridge building thing that people keep saying. It never gets there if you're on your side of the hill and I'm on my side of the hill, and no one is willing to acknowledge the wood and the planks that it gets to get to where we're at. We can't build and we can't reach each other if we're not honoring that gray area or dismissing it. Because usually it's dismissing that doesn't, again, honor, listen, this is what I value and I see when I think of protection. It has missed the mark in this area, and you are dismissing the fact that I feel that it has missed the mark.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so speaking of missing the mark, then so how can law enforcement departments get involved in better reporting and data tracking? Because that's also part of how, we really have those moments or spaces or metrics of accountability, whether it's, those FBI reports for excessive use of force or the quarterly reports that are due here in City of Harrisburg, according to our codes, that were missing for a hot minute until a particular person kept on asking and advocating, like at every meeting, that we need that. Okay. So
let me say that one of the things that I learned as a civilian working in that space is that transparency in spaces where you can't provide fullness of information becomes a difficult task to complete, right? So we would hope that every system is transparent, right? Yeah. But when you work for a space where being fully transparent with all information is tricky because too much information lends itself to criminal deviant kind of information gathering, right? Intel collection. So you can't say everything that you do, because if you say everything, then you kind of essentially say too much. But if you don't say enough, then we're not sure what's happening in there, right? So how to find that sweet spot of transparency, I think, in my experience, for what I've noticed, in my opinion, it has been something that a lot of people are challenged with when it comes to law enforcement. However, I will say that because it is such an entity that is threaded into the fabric of our society as it stands, the need for transparency is almost one of those quintessential pieces in having a functioning law enforcement space, right? So the reason why relationships work, if you take like a regular intimate relationship, the reason why relationships work is because when I ask for transparency, your information helps me to build trust. And your information allows me to feel that your intention is to be as clear with me as possible. Now, when you say, I got to hide my phone, or, I can't post you because if I post you, then too many people are going to want to, it's a red flag in intention.
Thank you.
So sometimes transparency or lack of transparency through not reporting or pushing back on what to report or understanding that people need it and then again dismissing
Listen, come on.
Or feeling like this is our information.
But
Why
is
do
it
you need the information? When really it's our information that you're providing, right? So
right?
data collection is to serve the purpose of the people. It is
Yes.
for us to maintain checks and balances and
Exactly.
what's happening, but also to utilize the community in
Yes.
building that strategic planning for what we see. So if I see that there is a
Mhm.
trend happening, which I can
Yes.
only see through data,
Yes.
then as a community on our
Mhm.
end, we're able to say, all right, let's strategize around how to keep stores safe because
Yes.
quarterly we're seeing an
Mhm.
increase here, right?
Yes.
But we cannot do the work where the data is not provided. And I
Absolutely.
think that
We're even
that
not
has
collecting it.
always been
Yeah.
the issue is that transparency and providing something in a transparent way, although we're realizing it is tricky. It is
Yeah.
tricky to inform when so much of the work requires a space of tact and kind of I don't want to say secrecy, but privacy
Oh,
rather. So a lot
but
of the work that law enforcement does require certain policies and certain things to be kept private. But when
true.
we're talking about quarterly reports and data, I
Yeah.
think that now with issue of the lack of transparency is what actually increases
Yes.
the thought that the intention to keep us informed is not something that is agreed upon for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if anything, right, this is one of the reasons, folks, if you didn't catch the last interview with Ken Baron, please go check it out, where he does highlight, because he works more on the research side of it in terms of, traffic law enforcement and the research into the data that's collected, right? And how do you adequately analyze it so that it tells the fuller story, of why certain practices are actually being, perpetuated. Is it really fulfilling the intended purpose, right, of why you're doing a thing? Like, oh, if you're putting up, like a traffic stop at this point, at this location, why is that, right? Is it that you're is it that you're already going in with a particular like bias or premise that this is what's going to happen if we have that confirmation bias? Like the data, if we collect proper data, which I know one of the excuses that I often hear is like, oh, we don't have enough funding. But I'm like, the funding's there.
Well,
Typically,
there are crime analysts and there's data collection happening in the department already existing, right? So there's not like there's never any numbers that are collected. But again, I think that that's people are scared to death of the implications that data will show.
Exactly. Yes. And but we have, again, if we are going to heal, we first must diagnose. We have to look at the problem, the sickness for what it is, and then like, okay, well, okay, then how what kind of solutions are we going to need prescribed to get to that positive, healthy outcome?
And we cannot know that if we cannot see that.
Okay, listen, ain't that the truth? Come on, family. Yes. Okay. So we're gonna shift it to more of like your personal experiences, if you don't mind. So then, given your work, given where you are now, how have perhaps your personal experiences with law enforcement impacted the lens or lenses to which you continue to do your service, or you continue to do advocacy work in this space of, just policing or law enforcement and community relations and trauma-informed activities, if at all?
Okay, yeah. Let me say this. When I first entered into the position, even though it's rumored as such, I never had a negative experience with law enforcement. I was just very clear on the system. I was clear on historical space of law enforcement and its purpose and the concerns around it from a civilian perspective. So
Absolutely.
it wasn't problematic so much as it was a clear understanding in my space, right? It was limited because I've never obviously served as an officer. So I went into it saying, my position is if there is something for me to see that will, if what I am saying is so left field, then show me something different. It will be no, there's no qualms about showing me something different if I believe that, water isn't wet. Simply show me that it is, right? So I think a large part of anybody's hesitation, for me, was an indication that, where there's smoke, there's fire. Mm-hmm. And I kept saying to people, because it really was an issue of, how can we trust you? How do we know that we can trust you? And the answer is just as much weight as you believe that you should be trusted. Really, right? Like, that's my position. Is if we are here to learn and we are here to really change the dynamics of understanding or thread both understandings. Because I never went into it thinking you're about to change my mind and I'm about to be anti everything I believe. That was never the intention, nor should anyone have ever thought that that's what it was. For me, I think what it was is, how do I take my perspective, which is a very real perspective, not necessarily rooted in the reality of what you're about to explain to me, but my perspective is real. And how do I take your perspective, which is very real to you and rooted in this space? And how do we thread both of those? Because that's the bridge building. It's not on you to convince me that your side is justified and therefore my side doesn't matter. Nor was it my job to say, what you guys are doing in here is all of the wrongs because all of this, right? I was limited in my capacity because there's a different level of things that I didn't know. And then they're limited in their capacity because even though you are civilians, after your shift, your life and your ideology is rooted in how you function as, law enforcement. So I think the conversations were like, we're human too. And I'm like, yeah, but
and we know that
the president will always be president, even if he goes to the gas station.
Okay.
Ain't that sweats? Because his position, his ideologies, his practice, his behaviors have molded themselves into this position. So yes, you are human, but you haven't been a civilian for about insert when you had badge here, right? And that's not to say that you're not human, but that is to say that you no longer serve in the space where you are solely a civilian. And because of that, your lens is limited.
Come on.
In that way. And it's not calling you inhumane or less human. What it is calling it what it is. Just like for me, I've been a civilian and a Black woman. I think this was my direct response to someone. Like, I can't give you a yes or no. What I know is that I'm Black. What I know is that I'm a Black woman. What I know is that I'm a Black woman in an urban area.
Come on.
That's all I can give you, right? Like, I can give you those realities that make it hard for me to unequivocally, without a shadow of a doubt, say yes to that answer. It's why I will forever remain in the gray, because until those realities change, there cannot be a full shift to a yes. And that's the piece, right? Is that my experience as a opinionated civilian lended itself to seeing where my space was factual and where my space was limited in really understanding how law enforcement works. And then also to that end, being able to explain that lens piece for me was important, is that in people saying you are not a civilian, it is not dehumanizing you. It is helping you to identify that your lens can only take you so far because you no longer serve in that capacity as a civilian.
Absolutely.
When you are no longer limited by authority, because you are authority. When you are no longer limited by force, because you are force.
Right.
So you will not, it's like the Matrix. You will never be in this space again without that level of understanding. So you are different. And that was the lesson, is that you are different. It's not inhumane, but you're different. And just like I am different, and I will never get it, right? Nor do I want people to compare BLM to Blue Lives, because you will never get it.
Family.
It's not the same thing at all.
I was like, I don't get to take it off, number one.
Right. It's not the same thing at all because it's not the same realities at all because of that lens.
Yeah,
So that was my experience with that.
And it's also like implies this ideology that like, oh, you have to be this or that. But I'm like, you can be both. And there are people who are both, who you happen to be Black, but also wear the uniform. And that's a very different experience. But also your mentality and your ideology is it's
It's
influenced. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
influenced by the fact that you happen to have this additional layer of authority in society. So thank you so much for answering that so thoroughly. Thank you, I appreciate that. Cool. Okay. Okay, so then when it comes to community relations, in this space of law enforcement, what, right? I guess it kind of answered it, right? When we're talking about like those opportunities for improvement or core challenges, right? What can the community? And I know I want to be very clear. I never want to put the onus on the person who's not in a position of power to do this thing to keep them safe, right? I want to be very clear that it is never the victim's job to protect themselves or keep themselves safe. However, as somebody who's a strong advocate for better policies, right? For better practical implementations, for better training, for better contextual data collection, right? Actionable, practical items that we as a community can strongly advocate for and push for accountability for, if let's say the top three things where you're saying as a community, because you're still a community member, with or without the position and title, what would you say maybe in this season? Because we have the the advisory board, folks are being nominated in and hired for those community liaisons as well positions. What are some real tangible action items, right, that folks can take for those of us who are interested in this work, for those of us who are continue to advocate for good conditions? What would you say? Let's say the top three things on your wish list of knowing what you know. You're like, these are the things we should really be pushing for. I know what mine is, but
I think one of the gifts that I will say that I was blessed with in that short period of time was who my leadership was while I was there, right? Shout out to Captain Milo Hooper. In my experience with him, one of the things that I was blessed with is a person who was willing to hear civilian concern, kind of ingest it, never reply with intention of persuasion and influence, but of understanding, and then replied with a space of education that helped me to mold how to best address something utilizing both lens. So I think that if I would have had, quite frankly, a different leader, my experience would be different. So my first thing is we need to, as a community, be clear on who we are labeling kings and queens and leaders. We are doing a disservice by feeding into the master plan of instant gratification as progress. And that's not to say, shout out to everyone handing out a backpack, shout out to everybody handing out turkeys, shout out to everybody cleaning communities. But if we continue to have leadership that is granting us freedom by collecting breadcrumbs instead of fighting for the loaf itself, we will continue to have spaces where poor leadership will award us only instant gratification, only feel-good sponsorships, only $250 contracts, only bottom of the barrel, right? So our responsibility is to keep it 1,000 with ourselves. and say, you are a great friend. You are a great leader to this capacity. But the type of leadership that you need for revolutionary, transformative change is not always wrapped up in how good someone makes you feel, right? So I have plenty of friends that make me feel good. I have a different set of people for who in that position makes me feel like I need to step my game up. So we need leadership that will practice in love and in wisdom how to take us to beyond activism, to action steps, to teaching their community how to push the envelope when people try to pacify us with the basics.
With bare minimum.
The bare minimums and the crumbs when everyone's eating. And then we are left to fight over crumbs because we are treating crumbs as bread.
Oh, come on. That's a word right there.
Nothing about us. I heard this quote somewhere. Nothing about us should happen without us.
Oh,
there should never be any space where Black and brown issues are discussed where we are not at. And it's not always necessary to be at this table, which is a weird table, right?
I know.
It's always necessary for us to be present so that people don't feel like they can play with us at all. So when people are like, why did you want to be director? Why did you want to do this? Why do you want to be in these spaces? When these spaces are threaded in not for us. But that's exactly where people like myself with the I wish you would spirit, because that's what it takes, right? I don't need you to be in there and go however you want to say it. It's cool. I'm just here, right? I'm a body. We need more. I wish y'all would act crazy at this table about us.
Thank you. Listen,
and that's different. And that's different than there is a Black person here who jokes with me about the jokes, who co-signs my crazy, and who allows for people to feel comfortable in continuing to disrespect the people who you then go to and say, yeah, I would, y'all, they know not to play with me. They don't. They play with you. So we need to understand that nothing that is about us at all should be happening without us, that we are to demand a space, a comment, a influence anywhere that we are. And I think the last thing for me is there is a mirror that belongs to the other person. We are responsible for saying things about other people and analyzing other people. There is such a humility and a power in being honest about our actions. Because not for nothing, when I worked in the space of law enforcement and they were explaining things, there were times where I was like, well, why can't we get it together? Well, why would you answer like that? Well, why? Like, what's going on, sis? Because there were things that were actually being done. And then when you look at it, the culprit was actually how we responded to it. Now, does that happen overall? No. But we have to acknowledge the spaces in time where it's like, all right, we're at a crime scene. Is it in our best benefit as community members who want answers to be distracting and joking at the scene? Is it on us? Does it better our situation when we create those pockets and those things? Now, and that's just an example, but what I say is that there are spaces where we can hold ourselves accountable so that we rise our level of seriousness in our own intention. But sometimes I think that we create spaces where we may allow or leave a window open for people to think they can play with us. And that is in our actions sometimes and in our space. And we should always move as if the caliber of respect is not a recommendation, but a requirement for how to deal with us.
Yeah. Like, yes. Oh, like, oh, gems. Yes. And like,
they can't play with us and we can't keep playing ourselves.
Period. And really, I kind of just some thoughts that I was having as you were sharing that perspective, right? To me is also, that's why if you notice, a part of my Black History Month extravaganza programs I'm going to be having, right? The importance of moving beyond performative diversity or performative like equity, right? That this idea of, oh, but we have a Black person, we have this person at this table, but I'm like, are they really allowed to challenge the system? Are they really allowed to speak up? And right, because like it's not enough to simply bring somebody into the space who looks like that affected demographic. It's also like important to allow them an environment to thrive, right? Because change doesn't happen by just simply having that tokenizing, that token person of said group, and then saying, okay, now come and just tout the same ideologies.
1,000%.
And so if we really are to see, real changes in this work, in this, idea of community policing, because even for me, I'm like, I still kind of cringe, and like, because to me, it's like, it's almost sounds like an oxymoron if you really think of,
as they are both performed right now. Yes. But
right?
here's the thing. That's the part of performative, to your point about performative activism, is that we just spent 2 years. I remember in these past 2 years feeling overwhelmed by the allies and the book clubs and the. And I was like, all right, there's a lot happening right here in that space. But what happens is that we took the contributions, we took the BLM sales, we took the stuff, we took the syrup bottles, we took that. And then the thing is that we always stop there. We do the capital steps, and then we stop there, and no one is pushing the envelope or actively participating in the hard part, right? Because the hard part is systemic work. The hard part is sacrifice. The hard part is willingness. And I say this to allies that were in the trenches these 2 full years. Now, what about, now that we've lost the vibrant colors of BLM signs and all of this and all of that, right? Like, where is the systemic sacrifice? That's the hard part. No one wants to do the hard part because the hard part costs somebody something. It's not free.
Come on now.
Performative theatrics are free. I can show up. I can do the thing. I can read. I can do the bop with you all. We can cry together and mourn.
It's
the
a feel
hard
good
part is, can I then go to my husband, who's CEO in corporate, and say, I believe in this. And in order for our marriage to function, for our kids to see, you're going to have to reroute your policies. That's the hard part.
Thank you.
The bed is not as warm. When you're asking for the person who is responsible for change, and then they don't do that. So the hard part is why we continue to be in theatrics. And then the harder part is when we accept theatrics as reality, right? Nothing about a syrup bottle has freed me at all.
Literally.
Nothing about you sitting at the steps or crying to me or asking me, what can you do, or what can you buy, or what Black-owned business can you buy this number of shirts from in that month, has created generational wealth for that company.
Right?
So if we keep being theatrical, then our lives will continue to be a show. Absolutely. But if we really want true activism, like, this is the hard part. In 2022, we're not going to ask, do you see color? In 2022, we're not going to ask, hey, do you realize that racism exists? Like, we're so beyond trying to convince people of what we all know. Now it's, I'm not going to keep taking, I'm sorry, babe, you got to do better. That's where we're at in the relationship. We're now at the point where you've kept apologizing for the text and the oops and the mess ups. Now we're at the point, babe, where if we're going to be in a relationship, I need to see the action. I need to see you sacrificing your time. Now we're at that part of the relationship, right? Like, don't text me and buy me flowers and say I'm sorry and then keep doing this to me, you're either going to change your behavior and let me see that you've sacrificed the women, or now I got to let you go because you're not really in the bop the way I thought that you were. But we have to stand firm in saying, no more flowers, no more I'm sorry, babes, no more, hey, I'm taking you out to vacation so that the world sees that I'm treating you good. We have to stop allowing people to lullaby us in that space because they feel comfortable there. No one has to do anything there. But if you push the envelope and say, delete your numbers, get rid of this, get rid of that, and move different, you're going to be able to see who really has intentions of honoring what the relationship is.
Yo, you just dropped some real gems right there, right? Yo, this idea of, you heard it. The best apology is changed behavior.
Mm-hmm.
The best apology is changed behavior. And for me personally, I typically say, listen, the only apologies I accept out here is change and change.
That's it.
That's it. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I'm like, that is just you assuaging your own guilty conscience.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't do anything for me.
We just don't have and that's the part of the leadership part, right? We simply don't have time to glorify breadcrumb behavior.
Literally, yes. And that's why at this point, I absolutely want to plug this, right? All of us, right? Even though we're talking about law enforcement, right? And really, we're talking. You could extrapolate it to all the other ills in society. All of us happen to find ourselves in certain spaces of influence and decision making, and it goes back to literally using your influence, your contextual privilege in that space to say, how do I move the needle a little bit forward? Mm-hmm. How do I speak up even when I know it's uncomfortable, so that I am not just a thermometer, such that I'm a thermostat. I need to be able to change. I need to be able to change that environment, not just come in and be like, oh yeah, it's 76 degrees. I'm like, nah, I would rather be
a word.
Come on, thermometer. Out here being comfortable being thermometers when what we need is thermostats. And so my thing, if anything, I keep telling people, in all areas of professionalism, absolutely advocate and people have demonized that word activism because you know me, I will continue to harp on about contextual data, the importance of collecting data, the importance of collecting contextual data that takes into account people's lived experiences. Absolutely. And I mean, right now, particularly in transportation, particularly in law enforcement, within transportation and traffic policies, there is so much change. There's so much coins out there, just like folks trying to do research on stuff that Black people have been telling them for forever. We've been telling y'all about these, inequitable jaywalking policies, about, folks' experiences interacting with law enforcement, even if they may not have personally had negative experiences with them, right? Mm-hmm. There is a communal trauma associated with how certain demographics interact with the law enforcement.
1,000%.
Right? And that, which is why, even right now, when we talk about, new innovative or like giving language and speaking up about these things, one of the really big terms coming into the environment is this idea of arrested mobility, which is understanding how, the issues that law enforcement, particularly in traffic, when we're doing traffic compliance, we're like, hey, it is important to take trauma, people's lived experience, and having a trauma-informed perspective of how we deal with individuals. Because, if somebody has endured assault, right, the way you stop and frisk them, the way you stop them and ask to search whatever, should be different, should be contextualized.
Even volume, I was saying something like, do you know that even how you yell, and here's the thing though, because I do want to offer something about law enforcement, is that there is a system responsible for everybody. So absolutely. What I also learned is that more so than police policies that are followed by a council or any of those other entities, is that there are some people who literally enforce the laws as they are written, that are unemotionally attached to them, that even may disagree with them, but they are serving to enforce them. So it starts at understanding who moves the needle. And a lot of times we're like, well, if police would just, and I've seen police officers or law enforcement even say, it's not even a us thing, right? Like, I could arrest the person you want me to arrest. I have done my job. At the judicial level, this person is going home after 20 minutes. And this is the frustration. So it was interesting for me to hear the frustration of law enforcement. And I want to honor that piece, because law enforcement has a space of trauma as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
That no one, and I will confidently say, there is no, I have not seen, I have not heard, I have not experienced that even within our city, we have structured a space to address the trauma that occurs when I have an 8-hour shift and I go from this high thing. Like, you can go from a hostage situation to a parking ticket to a murder to a stoplight, traffic control, to a this, to a that. And then you expect that to go on for 3 years. And then I am okay, right? So, like, I don't want people to wait until there's a high-end thing that occurs to address the mental health of officers. And I think to the officers, if we say credit, there is space where we lack, someone has to advocate for that. And
absolutely.
And that has to be the piece that happens, not necessarily because we feel that innately there are racist police officers, but just regular law enforcement officers that experience a level of trauma that we know different, right? So, like, they experience the murder of someone different than we do as a civilian. And while we work on our traumas and how we can best work collaboratively on this end, there has to be a space of health and wellness and accountability.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
For the mental health nuances that occur when you serve a life within that system.
Absolutely. Yes.
And that has to happen.
That ties it so perfectly to our closing remarks. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So, the fact that, I know, right? Time flew. Time flies. This is what always happens, right? Absolutely. It is so important. Again, when you talk about trauma-informed, just law enforcement, and that's why I'm keep saying law enforcement, because it's not just about the police. It's about the whole system. That from the time you're stopped in the street, or you interact with police personnel, all the way up to the judiciary system and to our policy makers out here that we vote for, okay? Which is why, participation in these processes, that even though they seem like, well, what is it to me? Again, I'm this is not the place to tell anybody how to vote, but I was just saying, participate in the things that you see impact your life. That's all I'm going to say. It is
at every level.
At every level, not just the national levels.
And know whose fault or responsibility it is for what, because it's not always a mayor or a council member. Sometimes it is above them, and we have to go out as hard to hold them accountable for what they trickle down. Trickle down.
Oh, absolutely. And also, right, that's why when we did that forum, why civic engagement is so important. It is so important to be civically engaged and mindful and educated and aware in those spaces. So I'll quick plug for one of our other local shows, the Harrisburg the Harrisburg Community Working Group now. That's we usually do Sunday lunch and learns. Now it's a monthly thing. Again, if you're local to the Capital Region, please do check us out, right? Because for me, at the end of the day, even here at HARP, even though the objective is to have global impact, we also have, to have local solutions, because it has, HARP is Harrisburg based. And so Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you so much for tying it all back to, again, the systemic issues, because we're not necessarily talking about individual problems. Because, even me, just because I may not have had negative experiences with law enforcement does not change the fact that I see the systemic issues. I see, how perhaps there could be trauma associated with how somebody even responds just to the presence of police, or to the idea of having to go before a judge for something that even is not even negative. Like, there are all these built-in responses that your body holds, right, to the trauma, whether it's personal, communal, all that jazz. And so
everybody is hurting. And one of the things that I realized back to my experience is that when I went in, I kind of had an attitude like, well, what could y'all possibly be so upset about? You're the one with the gun. What are you scared of? You're the one with the authority. What could you possibly be like? What's your gripe? And in hearing it, like, I've heard stories where people are like, I'm on scenes and I'm scared to react because I don't know how it's going to pan out, or I mean well, but if it's clipped the wrong way, it looks like this. And at first I was like, but then if you're in it to understand the other side, I go, all right, if I had a gun in authority, I don't know that is a space of fear for me, but how brave and how crazy was it for you to say, even with a gun and full authority, I still suffer from this piece? And I was like, so it helped me to understand the trauma. If I was going to be fully committed to trauma informed, I had to hear that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if anything, to me, it also sheds light on the need for perhaps better holistic training, right? What kind of training is taking place, across these departments, right? Across departments, like what kind of training, and really just like communal interactions, awareness of the relational dynamics with those whom you serve. Like, because to me, it is very difficult for me to imagine if that it would be easy to unalive somebody who you are, who as part of the community. Oh, I regularly drive this block. I regularly see these students. Like, I know their names. I know that I know their parents. I know that they go to this school. Like, I know that they've been struggling with this. I know maybe they've had a death of all these things. Like, when you have a contextual understanding about people and communal living, it really, you can't help but to behave differently. Because to me, really, right, that's where changed behavior comes. I cannot, words one of my favorite quotes, words instruct, but life teaches. You can sit there and talk about it, but until you experience with somebody else, until you connect on a human, on a personal level with a person, with another human being, that's when you realize, oh, okay, I can't just be frivolous out here. I can't just be acting anyhow, gun or not. So, and like, really, again,
there's a connection there that won't even allow that to happen.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, okay. Before we close, do you have any parting words of wisdom, nuggets? Plug any projects, stuff you got going on out here. Come on through.
So in my new space, I am working on contracting to be able to help companies understand how to move beyond theatrical DEI work and how to create action steps within their respective businesses and how to do self-audits. I also am interested in helping our nonprofits to strengthen their systems, looking at paperwork, looking at how to enhance how they do qualitative, quantitative, so that we are preparing ourselves, because no one is saving us.
Oh, come on, say it.
We need to make sure that if we're going to argue that we do not have a space and the opportunity comes, that the thing that is not in our own way is our lack of preparation. So be on the lookout for more Way with Words consulting information. And as it pertains to this thing and this topic, I want to say that one of the things that I've learned and that I've tried to convey in the short time that I was there is that there is something to be gained from understanding both sides and being honest about both sides and being honest about our role as community and civilians and what we need to do to keep our neighborhoods safe, to keep our children protected, and to keep an activism and advocacy and pointing out our own monsters, because we know who they are. And we do not need law enforcement to do the diligence of bringing that awareness and that accountability. We don't need systems for that. On the other end, it's important for law enforcement to understand there is equal trauma, respect the gray, respect that piece. That's the color we should be respecting, that gray area and that nuance and that understanding of why people feel that way. I think for me is that communities cannot feel like burdens, and cops and law enforcement cannot feel disposable. Those two pieces and those two realities for me is what drives it, is that on our end, we can disagree with systems.
Yes.
But at some point, we do have to be honest in how systems, if done correctly, cannot be seen as disposable, unnecessary. We can't be that far off that we don't honor and respect systems while still holding them accountable. And then on the system side, communities can't feel like burdens. Their voices can't feel like it's nagging. Their concerns can't feel like, or it can't be dismissed in a way that doesn't make us feel honored, valued, and heard. And if both spaces are honored, valued, and heard for the good work that is done, then we eliminate and we speak louder than the deviant criminals that are keeping our communities unsafe, and for the deviant and criminal people that are in spaces of systems and law enforcement. So communities cannot feel like burdens, but law enforcement can't feel disposable.
Facts. I mean, I have no further comments to add to that. She has sufficiently said what I was thinking, feeling, and that just needed to be said. And with that, a quick reminder out there again, if you're watching this, if you are having to cross this, remember there's 2 surveys on the HARP platform. To just gauge where we are as a community. Please do complete them. I will include them in the comment section. Anna, please also go ahead and comment, leave your tag in there so folks can connect with you afterwards. And again, the survey literally takes less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes. If you got 3 minutes, you can complete it and let people know. Share. Because at the end of the day, what do we keep talking about or harping about? Contextual data. It's needed, because if we're not getting it from these official channels, you know what is another way? Crowdsourcing. Like, what did she say? We are what we got. Ain't nobody coming to save us. So we have to start doing for ourselves the things that we're saying we need done. So here I am. Here's HARP. Continue to do the good work out there and connect with us across our social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. Yeah. Again,
love it. Love the work that you're doing. Keep it up. Keep it consistent. Keep it cute and keep it honest. I love it. I love it.
All right. Ciao, family. Take care, y'all out there.